I'm Noelle. I spent roughly 10 years as a data scientist before I transitioned into a role in product, as Scott had mentioned, because I was trying to see if I could prevent a lot of the data problems that a lot of us see every day before they actually happen. So in my experience, I've lived through many bad, and some really good attempts at including data scientists and data engineers into app dev team workflows as you're trying to build products that have AI in them. And I've done this at several companies, both at large enterprises working in-house, as well as a consultant where I've worked with everyone from startups into the Fortune 500. And I hope you leave here today with some strategies on how not to repeat some of these mistakes. And today, by the way, I'm going to use AI as an umbrella term to cover AI, machine learning, data science, etc. So if you like to skip to the how-to part of this talk, it is simply this. If you want to be successful, putting AI into your products, please involve your data people early. Please bring your data scientist and your data engineer into your cross-functional conversations with product, with design, with engineering. Do it frequently, do it early. And that's pretty much it. That's the secret. All right, we're done. Thank you very much. You all have been a great audience. Wow, that joke did not land. I told you I should have taken it out. Well, now that that's out there, I want to spend the rest of the time that we have together today talking through some of my hot takes around how you build products with AI, that cross-functional collaboration, and what happens when it goes all wrong, those tragic mistakes, and then what happens next. Companies, this sounds familiar, doesn't it? So companies all have different paths to using AI. And when I was a data science consultant, I would frequently have clients who would ask me if we could just add a little AI to the product. And they viewed it as something that I could just sprinkle on at the end on top of their product. And it was something that would make their product cooler and more appealing and shiny. But they didn't include how AI was actually strategic to their company vision, if AI was actually solving anything or any problems that they had, or even if they were data-driven to begin with. And what I learned is that a lot of these companies, a lot of these people fundamentally do not understand what AI is. They don't understand all the things that it takes to build it. And then ultimately, when that happens, when they're in the room making those decisions up front, they'll vastly underestimate what it takes to build it. And the people who do know that, the data scientists, data engineers, the data team, they're not invited to those early scoping calls. They're not invited to those early conversations. So there are a few problems with asking questions like this that I'd like to point out. So here come the hot takes. That's what you're all here for. First hot take, your data is way more important than any AI that you build. So this is a talk about AI, I know that, but I would be remiss if I didn't spend a minute to call out how important the data is in and of itself. And not just because it is a prerequisite for AI, which we'll get to in a minute, but because data itself is a prerequisite for measuring success and for understanding your business. And many, many companies don't even do that. They don't use their data effectively to run their businesses. It is far more important for you to have a well-instrumented product that generates all of the data that you'll need for running a data-driven organization than any one specific killer AI feature that you're going to build. And so that includes your downstream metrics, your dashboards, things you need for operations, and yes, of course, AI. So your priority should be asking about your data long before you're asking about whether or not you should be building AI. So it's still shocking to me that there's a lot of companies that don't even have this basic instrumentation in place. So immediately after your product is released, your executives and all the stakeholders will start asking questions like, hey, is our product successful? Is anybody using it? What are our most valuable customers doing on the product? And it turns out that no one can actually answer that if no one thought about instrumenting your product in the first place. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to take care of your data before you attempt to even do AI. But even though I said that doesn't mean that people don't try. They try all the time. And tragically, I've seen companies who reach straight for AI before even evaluating where they are with their data and their metrics. But if your company doesn't do data or metrics well, it's unlikely you're going to be successful implementing AI. So in addition to the quality of the AI being dependent on the quality of the data that you're feeding it, the success of your AI is also dependent on the framework and strategy your company has with dealing and working with data. So even if you're a data scientist and you work in one of these organizations, you say, I'm gonna do it anyway, I'm gonna build a model, and you're able to create a really great model. Problem is, building a great model, the model itself isn't enough. And I think that's the lie that all data scientists, myself included, believe at some point in their careers, that all you need to do to be successful is build a great model, killer model, that's it. So far from the truth, because success is not defined in a vacuum. Ultimately, the point of AI is you want it to be repeatable. You want it to be put into a product. That's what success looks like. But in order to do that, it requires way more than just building it in a box. It requires thinking about the ongoing data generation, the pipelines, the feedback loops, all of these things. It's a lot of work. So it brings me back to the question, hey, can you just add a little AI to the product? No, you cannot just add a little AI to the product. A few reasons why. So some executive saying, hey, we're gonna add AI by itself is not a strategic plan. It really isn't. And so unless you have data to show why it's adding business value to what you're doing, to your end users, to your internal teams, you shouldn't do it unless you know what you're doing. And then the expectation that just adding a little AI or adding anything data related is not the reality of it. Despite what targeted ads may say, despite what some of the pitches may say, it's not as simple as getting something out of the box, being hands-off, and getting a magical solution forever. You can't just get AI for free. You can't just get robust data for free. You can't just get your success metrics for free. There's a lot more involved to it. And broadly speaking, adding features that have AI, that surface something that AI is generating somewhere, isn't the same scale of effort as adding something that's in your typical sprint backlog. Right. So again, even though people shouldn't do this, they do anyway, which brings me to a tragic mistake, which is not involving your data people at all. So the assumption that you could just add a little AI to your product usually also comes with the assumption that all data and AI related things can be done whenever and by whomever. But that's just not true. So I've seen companies who say they want to build a smart app or an AI app from the beginning, end up saying, you know what, we don't need that yet. We're gonna push all of that data stuff downstream, including the data instrumentation. So for some future undetermined release is when they'll do it. And so because of that, they just never call the data team. They never call the data scientist or engineer to talk about it. And when you do go down that route, you're likely exchanging a simpler product up front for a lot of data technical debt downstream. And that not only affects the AI that you're building, but things like product experimentation, business reporting, and so on. And in other instances, I've seen the dev team being asked to take on all of the data tasks as well. And devs are smart, brilliant people. They're very capable, and a lot of them have taken machine learning and statistics in school. But it's unfair to ask them to take on all that extra work, to wear 3 hats as the data scientist and the data engineer as well. And in my experience, when they eventually have to hand over that work to the data team, it ends up being redone anyway. And it's tragic not including the data scientists and the data engineers to do the data work, because that's what they're hired and trained and have expertise to do. So speaking of data scientists and data engineers, let's get into some specifics about what it is they do. I guess Monica Rogati's a popular shout out today. But this, I don't know if everyone has seen this before, the AI hierarchy of needs from an article by Monica Rogati on Hacker Noon. It's one of my favorite charts. I highly recommend you go read the article. And so you'll see here that AI at the top, which gets all the hype and attention, ultimately cannot be done without all of the tiers below it in this diagram. And if you remember the hot take from a few slides ago, you'll see that even in this diagram, data comes way before AI. You need data, you need the infrastructure, you need metrics and analytics, which are important in and of themselves, as well as for use in AI. And data engineering tends to work on the bottom half of this pyramid, and I'd say that data scientists tend to work on the top half of this pyramid. And there's a bunch of overlap in the middle, of course, in the explore transform layer especially. And as you read through this chart, you'll see things that look very engineering, like infrastructure and pipelines. And you'll also see things that look very businessy, like segmentation and metrics, and those are very useful in making product or design decisions. So this whole pyramid doesn't entirely fall under another function, like engineering or product. And instead, it has a little bit of everything. It means, though, that there's a lot of places where the collaboration can happen. Remember the cross-collaboration I talked about earlier today? There's lots of you can see already where the topics where that would happen. But in order to take advantage of that synergy between those teams, we have to actively plan the collaboration. It just doesn't happen on its own. So you need to decide a few things. You need to decide who, what, and when. So who exactly is talking together? Well, at the start of this talk, I said the key was bringing data scientist and data engineer. Who else? Said we should bring in the product manager, bring in the engineers who are specifically working on the parts of the product that are touching the AI, as well as the data instrumentation piece, and bring in the designer. All of these people are making decisions that affect the data, and that in turn affects the AI, which then affects the end product you're all trying to create. You bring all of those people together, what is it that you're talking about? A few things. One, let's talk about what is AI expected to do in your product? Are you expecting it to spit out a recommendation, a number, a picture, a whole story? What is it? And by doing this, you're allowing your data scientists to discern what models you might most need to want to try. What would be appropriate? What data will you need? What tools will you need to build it? And in addition to that, so we mentioned talking about the data. So what data will be generated from this product? In addition to the AI, all of those other teams also will be looking at data. Your engineering team, your product team, your design, they all want to look at metrics. You should consider all of those things together when you're instrumenting your product. And finally, you should consider how that data is getting generated and how it will get from place to place. How does it get from the product into the AI, spit out results, and back in any feedback loops? And especially while you have all of those engineers together, you can really de-risk some things that way. Okay. So now we have the who, the what. The question now is when this team should talk. So time for another hot take. It is never too early to talk, but it is often too late. Honestly, most of the preventable mistakes that I've seen happen too late because, or if they even happen at all when they bring in the data people. And the best time to kick off this conversation with the team is during early development. So depending on how your organization builds product, this could be during the PRD writing process, the design process, MVP pilot, and so on. If you bring your data people into the conversation early, it gives them the opportunity to set themselves and everybody else up for success downstream. They help design the data that they later ingest and model. They right-size the expectations of the AI. They can highlight all of the data dependencies. It also provides you an opportunity to instrument the product once up front, so you can have a single source of truth about what's happening in the product, that all the teams who are looking at data and using it to make data-driven decisions are working on the same understanding. So of course, the data, product, engineering, design team, but also think about marketing, sales, operations, finance. Everyone in your organization who wants to understand what's going on with your product can look at one source of truth. For me, the opposite of a product that has absolutely no data instrumentation where everybody is flying blind is a product that has been instrumented multiple times by different teams. So you have different data sets, and it turns out that none of the metrics exactly line up with each other, and no one is working on the same source of truth. That is chaotic and very painful. So in addition to de-risking the data, you can also de-risk the AI, so that could be knowing what AI is feasible, given what you have at the time, given the data that you have, but also what you're constrained by technically, mathematically, legally, ethically, and also what you may be able to do in the future. You might not have the data yet, but you could. In addition to that, there's also a negotiation between what you might want to build, like, oh, I can make a super, super cool model that's super accurate, but maybe it will take too long to develop. Maybe it's too expensive to run. Maybe there's an alternative of something that's maybe not as accurate, but maybe sufficient. But that's a negotiation that you can have up front and ahead of time. So what happens if you don't have your data scientist and data engineer help de-risk your products? Well, remember the hierarchy of needs that we talked about earlier? You may end up not having the necessary foundation for AI. So even if you have executive buy-in, you have a really great business use case, everyone, great data scientists, you're looking forward to making AI, if the data wasn't taken care of much earlier in the process, you may stumble. You may find that the data doesn't support the AI that you want to build, just doesn't exist. Or the instrumentation doesn't exist at all. Or it turns out you have data, but it was instrumented by some person several years ago who's left the company, didn't document anything, and no one knows how it's defined. There's no record of it. Or the data is messy, it's incomplete, it's truncated, it's way too aggregated to support your AI. All of these things can make you stumble. And unfortunately, you can't build any AI until you fix this problem. Until you fix your data instrumentation, you can't move forward. And then, surprise, after you fix the instrumentation, then you gotta wait for the data to actually be generated. You gotta wait for having enough data to then build your AI. And since no one has a time machine that I know of, or a time stone, it's gonna take a while until AI is going to be possible. So we talked about when as being early, but when can also be about how frequent. And for this last hot take, say you've managed to wrangle everyone together early for the development lifecycle, but one conversation does not a collaboration make. Remember that this needs to be an ongoing collaboration in order to be successful. Teams that come together once, but then go back into their silos will have a lot of difficulty staying in sync. There's many ways that you can collaborate. The key is really just to do it frequently and consistently. My personal preference is to add data scientists and data engineers to pre-existing meetings, and then only add additional meetings if you have special topics come up in order to limit the overall meeting burden that we all have. And to give you some examples, if your team follows Scrum, a great place to do this is to add data people to your sprint planning or to your demos. And in sprint planning, you could take advantage of having your data people in the room by considering things like, hey, if you're looking at all the stories in the backlog, are any of them actually dependent on a data story? Is that data work actually completed yet? Are we blocked here? How big is that work? Or do any of the stories in the backlog result in new data being generated? Will that eventually potentially affect the AI? Is anybody testing it? Maybe we should. Another place that we can add data people is to invite them to your demos. Invite them to both learn what the product is that they're helping build, as well as the work that they're doing on AI and the data pipelines. And the added context and the feedback you get from that is so valuable across the team. I encourage you to share your progress before things are complete and polished. Share them when they're incomplete and unpolished. And I imagine at most companies, regular cadence communication looks somewhere between monthly and weekly, just depending on how your team is and what stage of the development that you're in. And for this last tragic mistake, let's imagine if we built products by having one big meeting to review a PRD or specs, assigning every individual person to their work, and then telling them to go work in a silo, in isolation by themselves for 3 months, and then come back together and try and piece everything all together and see if it works. That would be a disaster, right? Yeah. But that's effectively what I've seen happen in organizations with AI. They draw a line in the product up front. They say, this work over here is the AI, this work over here is the core product, and then the teams never collaborate or communicate after that. And while I acknowledge that building these components are very different things, it's really important to regularly check in to assure that, one, you're still working towards the same product vision, and two, that you're testing all of the pieces that are supposed to work together as you're building them instead of waiting for all of that integration in the end. And when organizations wait until the very end to piece things together, sometimes the fit between the AI and the product is so bad that they just scrap the AI piece. That, you know what, this was a bad idea, we're not gonna do it. We'll just go with the core product because we need to launch it. Right? And maybe they'll come back to the AI at a future iteration. Maybe they just abandon it altogether. Either way, it's extremely disheartening when that happens. And what's even more tragic is if that includes a lot of the data instrumentation pieces, you lose the ability to measure and learn because that part was taken away as well. So I've mentioned early several times today, but let's say you're in a situation where early has passed you by. The product is built and live, you're in a situation where you have decent data, and you decide, I want to move forward with AI. Can you still use AI, or can you still add AI to a product? Well, the short answer is yes. Yes, but the collective team will still face a lot of struggles getting AI into the product. So in addition to all the communication pieces we talked about earlier, there will still be technical issues with this. What you can build with AI at the time might be different than what you would want to do if you had been called in earlier. The fit between the pieces may feel clunky and inefficient because of the order that things were ultimately built. And when the product changes or anything causes the data to look different, things can break without anyone understanding where they happened or why it's happening, and it'll take a long time to debug. And I'm not saying that this is impossible. You can do this, but it takes a PM with a very bold vision that includes AI and has persistence to work through the technical challenge you'll likely have. So to recap the journey today, 4 hot takes. 1, your data is more important than AI. No, you cannot just add a little AI. It's never too early to include your data scientist and your data engineer into your workflow. And a single conversation is not a collaboration. And if you're still not sure if you're ready to put AI in your product, you can easily avoid some of the tragic mistakes I talked about today by ensuring that at the very least you have data that exists, that you have a data scientist and a data engineer who will work with your team, but also people who have data fluency in your organization, and especially a compelling business reason for using AI. And the last thing I'd like to leave you with is some guidelines for making your own collaboration framework for whatever that looks like at your company. Round up all the people that you know that you need to make AI in your product successful. Get them talking to each other as early as you can in the workflow, and establish a cadence for bringing this team together from the start through the release. And with that, that was the end. I wish you all the very best in your AI endeavors. Thank you so much for allowing me the time to share my experiences with you today. Feel free to reach out to me or come to the office hour that immediately follows after this, and enjoy the rest of the conference, and specifically this track that has a lot of real cool success stories of people who have used AI in their products. Thank you.